Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our Interfaith Dialogue. My name is Bella Saunders. I am head of RS at Repton School, and my faith position is agnostic, atheist, Buddhist. I'm a little bit confused, to be honest, about what I believe. So hopefully you're a little less confused than me. So if I just go around the list, if I start with Andy, can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Hi, my name's Andy Lewis. I'm an assistant head teacher at a school called St Bonaventures in Forest Gate, East London. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I've been a Catholic since I was born. I'm cradle Catholic, and that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James, over to you.
Yes, my name is James Holt. I'm Professor of Religious Education at the University of Chester. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or a Mormon, and I have been so for about 30 years, and I currently serve as a bishop within that church.
Thank you very much. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa. I am the Senior Learning Manager at the Jewish Museum London, and I'm here representing the Jewish faith.
Thank you. Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Shaw. I'm a teacher at a school in Oxfordshire, and I'm an atheist and a humanist.
Thank you very much. And finally, Waqar.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Waqar Ahmadi. I am Head of Religious Studies at King's Norton Girls' School in Birmingham, and by faith, I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for giving up your time. I just want to throw the debate wide open, and the first question we're going to be starting with is, do you believe in God? I think it makes sense if we all have a few moments to kind of explain our position, and then we'll start discussing from there. So who would like to go first? I'll throw it open.
We're all being incredibly polite. Shall I go first?
Robert, super. Off you go, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm an atheist and a humanist. I'm not convinced by the evidence put forward to support the existence of God or anything supernatural, nor have I ever had an experience which I think can only be explained by a God, and I'm more satisfied with the explanations of science regarding ultimate questions such as how the universe got there.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to come in straight away after Robert's comments? Thanks, James. Yeah.
Well, I do believe in God. I think mainly because, not mainly because, but initially because it was just an accepted fact in my home. We weren't particularly religious, but it was just the way that I was brought up. However, there came a point where I needed to make a decision, and because of religious experiences, and I believe in a loving Heavenly Father who guides and prompts and speaks to us through prophets, but also through the Holy Spirit, I'm able to know that God lives and that he guides and strengthens me each day of my life.
Thank you. Who else would like to come in? Yeah, Andy, thanks.
So as I said before, I was brought up as a Catholic, and my parents' faith was very important. They onto me, attending Catholic primary school. I think one of the big experiences for me was as a teenager going to Lourdes in the south of France, a place where Mary appeared, and I think there's profound meaning for me in that place. I didn't experience a miracle or anything like that, apart from perhaps that kind of transformation that kind of really made my faith grow. And that was definitely one of the reasons I went off to university and did a theology degree. And I think the kind of academic side of my faith became really important to me as well. Studying scripture, studying kind of the classic philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And, I found them convincing. I think as I've grown older, I've really grown to appreciate the beauty of the Catholic Church. And, it's kind of really long tradition. And it's where I feel at home. It as much as it feels like a justified position. It also feels like a natural position for me as well. I've had my doubts, I've had my questions, but for me, there's every turn there is an overwhelming evidence that there's someone behind all of this. There's someone that has orchestrated and designed and created in a as James said, a lovingly Father. That is what makes the most sense to me.
Thank you, Andy. Somebody else, got a couple of people left. Yeah, Lisa.
Right. So I feel like this is a sort of complicated question with not necessarily a straightforward response, which also is a very Jewish response to the question of do you believe in God? So I should kind of start by saying that there's many different streams of Judaism, from Orthodox to Masorti, Reform, Liberal, Cultural, and so on. I would kind of fall somewhere between cultural and liberal Judaism. So for me personally, it's kind of a yes and no answer to this question. I believe that there is something that connects all living and non-living things, kind of everything in this universe that exists. We all are made from the same atoms and molecules that have existed in the universe. So in that sense, I believe in something that connects everybody. I wouldn't necessarily say that I believe in a sort of formal God, and perhaps as God is portrayed in books like in kind of holy texts such as the Torah. But I am quite fascinated by religion in general. And I do believe that kind of whatever somebody believes about the kind of stories and the histories and things that are written in the Torah, written in the Bible, you can still extract a lot of meaning by asking questions of those stories and studying those stories. And in Judaism, it kind of does relate back to this idea that God is kind of unknowable and doesn't have a sort of distinct form, but it does perhaps make this very abstract idea easier to talk about and easier to discuss by kind of anthropomorphizing God and turning it into this concept into perhaps something with human features and emotions, and the way kind of God is portrayed in the Torah, perhaps.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Waqar, it's over to you.
Thank you. So I think in a similar way to Andy, obviously having been brought up in a religious household, I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which is a reformist denomination within Islam. So that's where my belief in God started. It was then supported by my own personal study, my own investigation into religion and beliefs, particularly when I was at university. But it was strengthened then by my own personal experience. I think the last one, personal experience, is the one that has really been the most powerful reason for believing in God. I would say that I'm a witness to prayers being answered. I also believe that miracles have happened in my own life and also others as well. And I believe that God, who as a Muslim I call Allah, is a living God. So his attributes are eternal, and that he communicates to people today as much as he has done in the past, and I believe will continue to do so in the future. And that experience has been a daily phenomenon that I have experienced, and God has manifested himself in wonderful ways, and more than I can ever be grateful for. And I feel as though my relationship with God is as a best friend, one I can confide in, one I can turn to in times of need, and also, especially when you have a best friend you will turn to in times of distress or difficulty, when you're going through a rough patch, and you expect that friend to be with you throughout that time. And I feel God as a friend has been with me throughout that whole process. When I've had difficulties, and there have been many occasions where I've had problems or challenges in my life, for instance, when I faced financial difficulties, where I have needed to buy something or give money towards somebody or something, and I cannot afford it at that particular time. Hand on heart, I can say that whenever I have turned to God as my friend, he's never let me down. and somehow out of nowhere the money has come. So all of a sudden I'll get 2 or 3 requests for private tuition that I never expected, or a utility company has written to me apologizing for having overcharged me for a service, and they've put hundreds of pounds back into my bank account. So those are just sort of some experiences that I've had, but they are not sort of one-off encounters or experiences. I think there comes a point when you see there is a pattern to what's happening in your life, and I think it then becomes unreasonable and irrational to just dismiss them as coincidences. So I feel as though I'm a witness to what the Quran states about God and how he reaches out to people who reach out to him. And there's a really inspiring hadith or saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that if you take 1 step towards God, he takes 10 steps towards you. And if you walk towards God, he'll come running towards you. So that has been my lifelong experience, I have to say. And I think that comes down to the very purpose of our existence, which is to establish a living and lasting relationship with our Creator, our friend, as I call him. And I genuinely believe that my faith, Islam, enables me to achieve that.
Thank you very much. James put his hand up first. Thank you, James. Oh, James, are you still there? I think we're having some problems with connectivity, but should we go to Robert then while James maybe tries to log back on?
Yeah, sure. And I think the people I meet who do have a religious faith, I think they seem to come into 3 categories. You've got the people who were kind of born into a religion, so to speak, and they've been immersed in it, and they went to religious schools and so on. I think secondly, there are those people who've had a kind of personal experience which they can only attribute to a God, like yourself, Wakar, and there are others who come to God through reason, and for me, none of those 3 apply. I wasn't brought up as anything. I wasn't brought up within a particular religion. I've never had an experience which I think to myself there's only a supernatural explanation for that. And like I said in my opening statement as well, I'm not convinced by the arguments for God's existence. So I've not been convinced to come to God through reason and through the classical arguments for God's existence either.
Okay, thank you, Robert. James, I'll go back to you. We had a bit of connectivity issue and you did put your hand up before. Oh, can you unmute yourself, James?
That always helps. Apologies for that. So yeah, just picking up on a couple of things from both Waka and from Robert. I think it's really important, as Waka was saying, is yes, I came to God in my teenage years, but it's an ongoing relationship. It's something that I have to rediscover every day of my life. It's something that I can't just think, okay, I kind of know God is there. It's something I have to refresh through my relationship with him each day. And I think with regards to kind of 3 views, and hopefully I'm still here, is that people come through upbringing, reason, and by faith. I think my faith is all 3 of those, I would hope. And yes, my experiences predominate, I think, because that's the thing that keeps me going. The other 2 are there, though, and I can't really deny those. Sorry about my internet, by the way.
Oh, that's okay, don't worry, we heard all of that, thank you. Andy, can I go back to you, please? You had your hand up, and Lisa, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, you know, when you hear kind of the way people, I suppose, of different beliefs kind of categorize, and like James, actually, I kind of see myself really as a kind of combination of those things, and I suppose that kind of links to, you know, I know it's kind of A-level kind of philosophy of religion here, but it's why I think kind of Swinburne's cumulative argument is so powerful for me. The fact that actually it's not just one thing on its own, it's this kind of almost, I couldn't see a way to not have my faith, if that makes sense, because for me, I kind of find all of those things kind of build and build and build till you're left with the only possible outcome for me, that, you know, God does exist, and I believe. The other thing that, you know, to go back to something Robert said quite early on about kind of the answers perhaps for some people are found purely in science. I find kind of that whole area of religion and science deeply fascinating. And, you know, I've been doing some reading recently about kind of Francis Collins, who, you know, is worth looking up his kind of faith journey, where he kind of was quite a vocal atheist, but then through his study of science, he kind of came out the other end. And I think that's kind of a really interesting way of looking at, you know, scientific answers, that actually, is there a point where sometimes that science leaves us with the only possible answer of being that there's God? And I think that's, you know, such a deeply fascinating area for me. And again, I kind of always want to continue that study, that academic side, as well as that kind of relational side. And I do feel that my faith is very kind of multifaceted in that way. And I think that, you know, is why it is particularly strong for me.
Thank you, Andy. Lisa, I'll come to you, and then Waka, I'll come to you next.
Thanks. So I wanted to respond to something that I don't remember who said it now, about kind of perhaps 3 different reasons of kind of why people might find God or kind of come to this conclusion. And I actually kind of think I had quite a different experience. So I was raised, my family is Jewish. I was raised Jewish, but in not a sort of very religious sense. We celebrated festivals, but more because it was our tradition and our culture, rather than, because it's commanded by God or something. The same way that, for example, a lot of people would celebrate Christmas, not necessarily for religious reasons, but for cultural reasons. I mean, here we live in England, and the entire country shuts down on Christmas Day, regardless of whether you're Christian or not. But there's an interesting, for me, it was more this kind of, this, I guess, struggle of the kind of accepted view of what God is in Judaism. And it just reminds me of, there's the story in the Torah of when Jacob wrestles with the angel, and it turns out he was wrestling with God. And then afterwards, he's given the name Israel, which literally means struggles with God. And I guess that's the kind of way that I can describe my relationship. And I think that a lot of Jewish people might have that same kind of feeling about God, even people kind of across different streams of Judaism, because there is always this idea in Judaism that you should always kind of question everything and not take everything for face value. So, and there's lots of times in the Torah where maybe God doesn't really come across in the best light. Or maybe God has a bit to be held accountable for. And it's kind of this idea that, you're meant to wrestle with these ideas and struggle with these concepts and find difficulty in them. And that's also why in Judaism, you're never really meant to study Torah alone. You're always meant to study it with a partner, so that you have somebody to have a debate with and have an argument with about the text, and not just take what you read and say, okay, I accept that.
Thank you, Lisa. Waka, I'll come to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just coming back to something that Robert said at the beginning about how he feels, because of a lack of evidence or lack of personal experience, he would find it difficult, as other atheists and humanists would, obviously, in finding any faith in a supernatural or divine being. And I think it's quite interesting when we try and examine the word evidence itself. So if we understand evidence as being the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid, I think we need to factor in also that when you are trying to find evidence for the existence of anything, that the method of investigation has to suit the object in question. So if you use the wrong method of investigation, you'll naturally get the wrong kind of evidence. So for instance, if you're trying to prove that God exists, then the means of investigation has to be suited to what God is. And as far as I think what most people's beliefs about God is concerned, he's not a physical object. He's not part of the physical universe. Rather, he's transcendent. He is beyond matter, beyond energy, space and time. And so I think it's like trying to establish the existence of clouds by trying to listen out for them, or by trying to prove the beauty of a rose by trying to taste it. That's not the right way of going about trying to prove the existence of something. And I think actually the same principle is actually applied in mainstream science itself, that a lack of direct empirical evidence for something doesn't actually invalidate its existence. Now, for instance, physicists now believe that about 95% of the known universe is completely hidden to us. It cannot be physically detected by any of our most sensitive instruments. So everything that we can see, feel, and detect just makes up 5% of the universe. And I think that if our best science today can only account for 5% of the known universe, it shows the limitations that science has. And I think even obviously for the benefit of students that are listening to this, on a daily basis, we refer to things that can't be physically detected or proven. Time, love, thoughts. You can't verify these things by looking down a microscope or carrying out certain experiments. And I think, coming to a very current issue, COVID-19, I think that's more of a reality to those who have contracted it or directly been affected by it than those who haven't. And yet very few of us would actually doubt in the existence of COVID-19, even though we haven't contracted it. And obviously we trust scientists and what they tell us. They've spent many years studying their field of expertise. They've gone through the required training. They've got their qualifications, and they've got the much prized doctor title at the end of it all. So obviously we take precautions with things, even though we don't physically see them ourselves, and hence the reason for the lockdown. And I think the same is true of spirituality and belief in God. As Muslims, we believe that there have been more than 100,000 prophets throughout history who have appeared at different places at different times. They were not in touch with each other at all. This was before the age of social media and the internet. And yet they all said exactly the same things about God, about the afterlife, about family life. And coming back to the idea about science, again, there is a very special relationship, I think, in Islam, especially between Islam and science. Almost a third of the Quran is actually a commandment to people to study nature, to make use of reason, to reflect, and to make use of our intellect. And this was actually something that inspired the earlier generations of Muslims to make unparalleled contributions in the fields of science. So I think in terms of the relationship between faith and science and reason and logic, I think they are actually closer than we might actually sometimes think.
Thank you very much. Robert, can I come back to you? Because I feel a little bit like everyone sort of responded to your initial question. Would you like to say a few words on sort of what we've been listening to?
Yes, but of course. I do take your point, Wakar, about cold facts, and we shouldn't be looking for God or evidence for God, perhaps in the physical world, because God is not matter. And you mentioned love and said, we can't prove the existence of love, but I can see the effects of love. I can see the effects of love in my family, for example. I can't see something within the world that I can only attribute to God. And I think to pick up on your point about science and God, and it's a point that Andy made as well, is that I think we've used God as an explanation for things we don't understand, and I think we must try to avoid being tempted into doing a similar thing about things that we don't understand about the current world, like about the origins of life and the origins of the universe. If we resorted to God for things that we didn't understand, and we continued doing that, we wouldn't have an explanation for rainbows. We wouldn't have an explanation as to why the sun appears to move across the sky, for example.
Thank you. Who'd like to come in? I think everyone's had a chance on that. Thanks, James. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because reason can only take us so far, and I don't think God sometimes is the only explanation for some of the things that we see in the world. But for me, he's the best explanation. So I'm not looking at a God of the gaps that only fills in the spaces that I don't understand, but he fully strengthens and is behind everything that goes on in the world, both and so to recognize his hand in all of those things. And that's why I think my experiences with him on a daily basis are far more important than kind of looking at the reason debate, though that is important and there has to be logic behind it. I do recognize that God is not the only explanation to some things, but he is the best explanation and the one that makes most sense of my life. So I do understand where you're coming from with that.
Thank you very much, James. I'm just going to throw out a really controversial question, because one of the things that kind of I like to do when I'm kind of a bit confused is to ask more questions. So we're all sort of talking about how or what God means to us. So my question would be, as a sort of agnostic atheist, someone who's a bit confused, is it okay to say that existence of God is just a matter of perspective? Lisa.
So I think this and the kind of the question you have just thrown out, I think actually relates also back to what Robert and James are both saying. So there's this kind of interesting idea that is not just necessarily a Jewish idea, perhaps, but kind of the way when we think about, say, for example, the creation story in Judaism, the way we kind of explain it, you can have Jewish people who might believe in the creation story kind of exactly word for word as it's written in the Torah. So God creates Adam and Eve from the dust of the earth. You could also have Jewish people who believe 100% in evolution and science. But then you can also kind of have this sort of fusion of, you can believe in evolution, and if the more that you perhaps learn about evolution and the kind of intricate ways and the sort of just chance that all of this happened, and you can believe that perhaps there is something divine in all of that as well. And I think it also relates back to this idea about what we think God is. When somebody pictures God, what are they thinking of? Are they thinking of kind of an older man with a beard sitting on a throne in the sky? Are you picturing perhaps, ancient oak trees or nature? Or are you picturing molecules and atoms? What exactly does that mean? This concept of divinity, in a sense.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come in on that question? Is existence of God just a matter of perspective? Thanks, Swakar. Yeah.
So yes, I mean, Islam, I believe, is a faith that promotes God as being the Lord of not just Muslims, but Lord of all the worlds. So God has created everyone, be they believers or non-believers. And there is a very strong principle in Islam of freedom of conscience and freedom of faith. And so it allows people to be able to believe in what they wish and to be accountable for their actions in life. So everybody carries their own cross effectively. And so when the Quran says that there is no compulsion in, although the word religion is usually used, the word in Arabic is actually deen. And deen is actually much broader in meaning than just religion. It means any way of life. It could even include atheism. So you are free to believe in what you wish. If you feel that your truth is your truth and you can live by that as you wish, nobody can impose beliefs upon you. Obviously, as Muslims, we believe that we have a particular duty and a ministry, if you like, to convey the teaching of peace, which is the meaning of Islam throughout the world, but it can't be forced. It can't be imposed upon anyone. So there is a strong emphasis on freedom of belief. And if that means that you consider your truth to be a subjective truth or an objective truth, you're free to believe that.
Thank you. Andy?
I think there is a great danger at times where, and this is, I suppose, one of my slight apprehensions about, the more universal use of kind of worldviews within RE, that, it essentially is diluting kind of faith positions and the truth claims that kind of go with them as being kind of an opinion like the football team you support or the kind of music you like. And I think the thing that makes faith positions, whether they are religious ones or non-religious ones, is that they are something more than that. And therefore, I do struggle with this idea that it's simply different interpretations. I think that's potentially quite a modern interpretation. If it was just that, I don't think people would, die for it. For example, I don't think people would dedicate their whole lives in that same way. So, and I think there is that danger that sometimes, in the classroom, in conversations, we obviously can be kind of very nice and civil and understanding of different people's kind of faith positions. But the reality is, sometimes there is that difficulty that you may face as a person of faith, that actually you believe that your religious convictions are correct, otherwise kind of why would you have them, and that other people have got it wrong, shall I say. And I think that can be quite difficult to reconcile, but for me that's essentially what faith is. It's not just about opinions, it's not just about perspectives. There's something of truth in it, and if you believe that you are following the truth and living your life in that way, that I suppose that kind of gets into the eschatology and salvation and heaven and paradise and eternal life. It's I suppose it's one of the reasons why I do believe, kind of again, to go back to kind of A-level philosophy of religion, Pascal's wager is very convincing for me. The idea that we live in a particular way because we see a reward that is truly great and worth a gamble on, because that for us, that for me would be a truth.
Thank you, Andy. Just to kind of ask a follow-up question there. So do you think that you're right and we're all wrong?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Essentially that is what a faith position is, isn't it? And we can be very nice around it.
I would agree with that. That's why I'm asking. I'm trying to make people say things I'm looking for people to say. Sorry. Yes, I would agree with that. Go on.
Why am I Catholic? I'm Catholic because, I genuinely believe that the Catholic faith provides a guidance to me in order to reach heaven, to be with God. Now, I'm not saying that the rest of you will not get to heaven. Again, the Catholic teaching is, there are other ways. But essentially, I'm doing part of the reason that I have my faith is because I believe it is the right thing to do. Otherwise, it would be like supporting a football team or having a favourite band. Yeah.
Of course. Thank you, Andy. That's great. Thank you, Andy. James, can I come to you on that question? So the issue of, is the existence of God just a matter of perspective? Is he still there? Hi, James. Are you still with us?
I am. Sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry. I'll just come to you on that question. Is existence of God just a matter of perspective?
I actually agree with Andy, because there is a great myth that everyone's just the same, that we all believe in the same God. And while I agree with Waka that God is the ultimate reality and the ultimate truth, the greatest truth for me as a Christian is that Jesus is the Son of God. But that's the greatest sin within Islam, is ascribing a partner to God. So those two things can't go together. They can't sit together and say, well, that's just a matter of perspective. If Jesus is the Son of God, then there's problems so as much as we respect everyone's opinions and everything like that, and it is trying to be nice to everybody and giving everybody the freedom of religion, and it's not just trying to be nice, it is actually being nice to everyone and allowing this freedom of belief, there are contradictions between the different faiths, and so that it can't just be a matter of perspective. I can't be right, and neither can Robert, because either there is a God or there isn't a God, kind of thing.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to make us sort of have a little sort of final brief word on everything, but thank you, James. Super stuff. Waka, can you maybe reply to that, considering James kind of referenced Islam in his answer?
No, he's absolutely right, and he's free to say it, and that's the beauty of living in a democratic, open society, that you can actually have this healthy exchange of views and ideas. And that's something that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, exemplified perfectly when he claimed prophethood. There were a group of Christians who came to see him and actually had a debate with him in his mosque. And the time for prayer came and they asked leave so they could pray somewhere. And the Prophet said, this is a house of God, like anything else. You can pray here as you wish. And I think that's a great precedent for dialogue and debate. So yes, of course, we don't hide from the fact, and having been good friends with James and Andy for a number of years, we respect each other's differences, but also our similarities. And we don't pretend that there are some really fundamental differences in our faith when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to the nature of God even, or what the afterlife is like. But that's the beauty of life, I think, is that if we were all the same, society wouldn't progress. And I think that's why you need a plurality or supermarket of ideas, as I call them, where people can sort of look at what suits them, and that becomes the basis of a dialogue. Yes, I do believe that my faith is true, but I don't believe I can pass judgment on others either. That is for God to do. So that's my position.
Oh, thank you so much, Wakar. Lisa, I'll come to you, and then Robert will finish with you, if that's okay.
Right, so I'll try to be super quick. So just a couple of points about this kind of whole idea about, is your belief the true truth and everybody else is wrong? And I think this is such a really fascinating concept, because actually throughout the Torah you see multiple times this kind of thing of God saying many times to the Jewish people, don't bow down before other gods, don't bow down before idols. And actually, if you look at that from a sort of historical perspectives, well, why did that have to keep on being repeated? It's because, well, people were doing it. There was lots of kind of gods existing in multiple time in kind of the ancient Near East. And it also kind of relates to this kind of idea of, there's a lot of different religions that exist in the world today, that have existed throughout history, that perhaps people don't practice anymore, Greek and Roman religions, organized religions today, to everything such as kind of local traditions in various regions. And if everyone who follows one of those thinks that their way is the truth and everybody else is wrong, well, is that right? Can that really be correct as well? And I think it also just really demonstrates that perhaps there is more than one path and more than one way to find God, because all of those people who observe one or more of those religions has a very strong idea, or not so strong, of their relationship with God, and believes that they have found God. And I don't necessarily think that makes anybody else's point invalid.
Thank you very much. And Robert, just to finish with something you want to say on that issue of perspective. Don't forget to unmute yourself first.
Just to go back to your original question, is belief in God a matter of perspective? I don't think it is. I don't think it is, like a piece of music with having different opinions on things. Going back to your original question, is belief in God a matter of perspective? Either a supernatural deity that transcends the natural world exists, or it doesn't exist. So I disagree. It's a matter of perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to do, folks, I'm going to stop the recording there, and then we'll just finish with a little ending, and I'll explain a few things following this. But thank you very much for your assistance. It's been really, really helpful. I think when we're exploring issues of difference, we really do need to celebrate it. So thank you very much for being involved.